It'll take a minute to come on live. It says we're live. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, happy World Product Day, guys.
You're the first in the world. You're the first in the world to celebrate, right?
I love it. Oh, no, New Zealand.
They always beat us.
Closer to the timeline, closer to the dateline. That's what it is.
There you go.
So what do we've got heaps to cover today, but before we go into the serious topics, it's probably time for a daggy question. So have we got ideas potentially on a movie we'd remake if we could, maybe with some new actors in it? What do you think, Greg? Putting you on the spot.
I don't have a good answer for this. The first thing that came to my head is just a book that I really want made into a movie.
Oh, tell me.
Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothschild. Probably one of the best fantasy books I've read. But, I think they're making a TV series about it. Sorry, what was that?
Who would you cast in the film? Do you have any ideas? You could cast yourself.
The main protagonist is a redhead, so I don't know.
I would think it would be like a macho type movie, but with like Top Gun remade with Danny DeVito. But in a period piece. So it's kind of like at the time, if I could go back in time and then remake Top Gun with Danny DeVito as Tom Cruise.
I'm going to be controversial and say I want a movie that's not going to be remade, because I know that the guys who love comic books love Constantine and found the Keanu Reeves riff off it, not to character, not to the story. But I'm going to say I love him as Constantine, and I wish we'd do more of those movies. But I'm a bit daggy like that.
Daggy like
I wouldn't remake a movie. I'd remake a TV series. We've been watching Friends recently, and I've realized how problematic that whole show is. So I'd kind of clean that up a little bit, and maybe remove the whole Joey man bag, storyline, because it's horrible now. It hasn't aged well.
Oh, classic. You're so there. It's so cringeworthy, isn't it?
Well, I'm sure everyone who's tuned in is wondering, are we in the right place? You're in the right place.
We'll talk about product.
It is kind of about product, right? Yeah.
Well, this is a good enough opportunity to make sure that you're connected to the chat. So you just need to go through those extra clicks to sign up for the chat in YouTube or connect to your account. Perfectly motivator. If you're passionate about remaking a movie or TV show and you want to share, make sure that you go through those extra steps to enable your chat and be a part of the discussion. I'm sure we'll start seeing some live comments pop up any minute.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear where people are dialing in from. Like, drop your comments in, and we'll show them on screen. Just post where you're coming in from. It's good to be also joined by product leaders from Brisbane, and we thought we'd just get everyone up at the start just to have some banter, and then I think there's going to be some questions at the end. So really looking forward to those sharp questions.
I'm loving seeing everyone back in their offices. I'm sure people are really enjoying coming in from their offices. I'm at iSeek Plant here in Brisbane. In the Valley, and I'm seeing other people sharing from their home offices and from the main offices as well. Be great to hear some people that are outside of Brisbane, even though we've got a passionate group. I know we've got some registrations from outside of our time zone as well.
Did anyone just not go back into the office? Anyone's company just decide, there you go. No more office anymore, or never was?
The office is still there. It's just optional if you want to go and use it.
Oh, nice. Oh, fascinating.
Same here. Just in the habit now of working from home. So very rarely find myself wanting to make the commute into the office.
I go into other people's offices, so does that count?
Yeah. what I was thinking is like the whiteboards that were left, like the stories. Like, what about the stickies that were left on the wall? You know, like
It's like
did you just
Chernobyl.
walk back in? You were just like, oh yeah, we don't like the stories they'll tell.
They would all be exactly the same as how you left. No progress.
No progress at all. Exactly. Like,
wait, what was it like in San Francisco? Was it just like a mad rush where everyone just dropped their stickies where they were and ran out the door and everything's just frozen in time?
It did sort of feel like that. I mean, depending on, it crept up quickly, you know, it just sort of matters. It really was like the state at one point said, or the city at one point said, that's it. You know, we're closing things down. I sort of seemed that I was like 4 or 2 weeks ahead of everything in terms of my worry. So I was always like writing Spencer, the CEO, like, I think something really serious is going to happen. Like, we might need to do this, but that was just like being a worrywart, I think, about it. So
we've had some people come in from Canada. So welcome into ProductTank Brisbane. Yes, you're in the right spot. We are talking about products soon. And we are talking about whether you're in the office or out of the office at the moment, which seems to be a constant joy, juggling their product team and workload, whether you're working from home or from your back in your office with your team. And we're just going to start pretty soon. We're just having a quick chat and letting people all log in, because I'm sure everyone's rushed out of their 11 a.m. meeting, which hopefully had a hard stop at noon and is scrambling to find their logins. So hopefully but I'm seeing lots of people jumping in. Welcome from Sydney. Welcome to the guys from Sydney as well, and from Interstate. Cool. All right. Well, given it is a couple of minutes past 12, I might start some of the introductions. And in case you're just joining us now, you can see faces from across our community and our guest speaker, John Cutler. But let's talk a little bit about why we're here. Firstly, happy World Product Day. It's such an important day of the year where we get to celebrate what we do. Now, in case you haven't got some background on ProductTank, this is your first connection with ProductTank. Every year around this time, across 200 cities globally, product people gather to celebrate our craft. We're a community of product people by product people, and that's every aspect of community. So that could be a product marketer like me, product owners, BAs, you could come from engineering, sales, design. So any aspect, anyone that's our entrepreneurial or founders that join our group as well. So anyone that's genuinely interested in the mission of making a more successful product. Over 10 years ago, the first ProductTank met in London, and we've later developed the Mind the Product conferences, which we've got coming up a little bit later in the year. And the Brisbane chapter is all about volunteering. So we get together to share content, to share findings, to share experiences. And this is really an open place for people of all different experiences. So you'll meet people from all different walks of life, all different business models. And it's a really open place for you to share and ask those kind of tricky questions that you need some advice on. And this is a really big day for us because we do celebrate the important work of product. And we've got people dialing in from everywhere. So from Sydney, from Canada, and a few other places also coming in. We will be recording today's session because it's such a fantastic session, and it will be on YouTube. So you will be able to access it. But this is an interesting kind of one-off day for us because, as you've seen, we are running our scale roadmap, roadshow, I should say, through Brisbane. So ProductTank is actually running a program through this year where we're going to stop at all the major, or some of the major brands that are building product, those product teams, and we're going to hear from them the reality of building product. So the challenges they're facing, some of the learning, so you actually get the insights from the guys that are doing it on their premises. So just as a reminder, so today's World Product Day and we've got an online event, but next month in June we'll be on site at the barracks with Ash and the crew at Outfit, and we talked to Outfit last year, so it'll be interesting to hear their progress since last year. and talking about how they're generating, they're moving the needle because they are in that kind of scale up phase. Actually, I might be able to find Ash to have a quick chat with her. Hey, Ash.
Hi.
So I see that we're coming to eat your food and drink your wine in June.
Absolutely, and beer too, if you're lucky.
and non-alcoholic drinks. No judgment.
That's right.
Absolutely. That's right. And so we met with you. You were one of our featured brands last year, and as part of this scale program, what do you think will be some of the insights that you can share that have happened in the last 12 months?
I think obviously, coming back to the office and COVID affecting us and how we've handled a lot of the transition back to the office and bringing customers back on. But yeah, we've been going through another growth spurt as well. So I think how the teams come back in, and you can see plenty of Post-it notes behind me. We're using the space well and really getting into some of the heavy challenges of how you scale a SaaS product for large companies. So that's all pretty generic, but I'm sure we'll get into some deeper use cases when we actually start rattling through the Prezzo.
Absolutely. Save the good stuff for when we're there. Thanks for that, Ash, and see you in June. And guys, we'll drop a registration link and reminder. So we're just still locking that date down, but it'll be probably the last week in June. So we'll open early registrations just to kind of lock it into your calendar. And then as a preview too, in July, we're over at Scheduloo with Jen and the team. So thank you so much for hosting us. It'll be really interesting to hear their journey in the last 12 months because it's been quite an active one, having followed their story. But I think that's enough from me. I do encourage you, however, to use the chat tool. So jump across and use that chat tool and be engaged and ask questions and make your comments, because the more engaging it is, the more we can interact and tailor the experience for you. But the first thing I'm going to do is introduce our regional coordinator, Jace Clamp, who also moonlights at Clipchamp most of the time, to get him to walk through and introduce John. So I'll leave you guys to it. I'll be back to facilitate Q&A.
Thanks very much, Lou. It's my honor to introduce John, really. I got to know him. I would bring him up now just while I'm talking about you, John. Hello. Thanks for joining. I got to know you through Twitter, actually, and I'd like to think that I have like an insight here or there that might be shareable, but where I have like one in a week, it seems like you have like 10 in a day. And I learned from Twitter that you're actually working on a book. Is that right? I think you might be muted. Hang on, unmute yourself.
There we go. Yeah, I had a false start at one during COVID, which I just had to call quits on. But then I'm, as part of my job at Amplitude, actually part of my role is authoring a book now. So I have to do it for work. So it's going to have to get done. So yeah, looking forward to it. And that book is going to be on change agency and trying to, change your company from within to the best of your ability to be more impact focused. So we're looking forward to that.
And just as awesome as all of the how to be incredible at product type insights that you share is also photos of the bike rides with the kids, equally as important, probably more so. It's been good to see like a facet of life, but just to share with the audience, the background from Zendesk and Pendo and all those places, and you're currently with Amplitude, which so rich in terms of helping customers navigate, your customers who are the likes of us, platforms and so forth, navigate to true insights and success for their customers, which is a very interesting place to be. I won't burn up too much time. If you've got slides, feel free to share your screen and I'll pop those up as well. But otherwise, over to you, and we're very thankful to have you join us today.
Great. About halfway through, I'll let you know, and then we'll share. I have some things to show, kind of a whiteboard. We can go through an exercise together, which I think would be fun. But we'll keep the slides off until that point. So, yep, thanks again to the organizers. It's an incredible opportunity. We are a little bit behind New Zealand in our World Product Day timing, but I think we still get some credit here for being early. ahead of the rest of, at least here in California. Quick introduction for me, just so you have the context as we go through the talk. I have a background in product management and UX research, mostly B2B SaaS in the last maybe 5 to 7 years. So Zendesk, Pendo, Appfolio, which is property management, now Amplitude, which is focused on product analytics and insights. So that's my background, product management, UX research. I did get involved in writing a lot. And that's been, I mean, geez, if it wasn't for Martin and James and Arnie Cutler, who invited me to they had an MTP Engage event in Hamburg, I probably wouldn't be here and probably wouldn't have my job at Amplitude. So this has been a fortuitous set of things that happened as related to Mind the Product. So I'm forever grateful for that. My role at Amplitude, I'm primarily externally focused. I help prospects and customers, in addition to kind of get the most out of our product, think about how they build product, how they plan, how they prioritize, how they do product strategy. Our theory as a company is that, our mission is to help people build better products, but, a lot of that is outside our product as well. So we try to help them in whatever way possible. So the goal for this talk today is we're going to talk a bit about what I would say some of the stagnation that I'm seeing in orgs struggling to be more product-led, or we could use the word product transformation, any variation of those things. We'll discuss some common patterns that lead to this, at least that I'm observing. And if you hear things in the back, that's my son. So he's probably breaking things at the moment, and mom's taking care of him. So that's life in the pandemic. And then I'll flip over to Miro and we'll discuss a flywheel that I've been working on with some reflections on what this might mean for, fixing some of these common patterns. And I'll try to leave you with some potential paths for improvement. We'll figure out a way to get, maybe during the Q&A, to share that Miro board with everyone so you can see the details. And this is a work in progress, but you'll be the first in the world to kind of see what I'm working on related to this stuff. So that's fun. And yeah, that's the goals for the talk. So why this talk? Why did I mention to Jace that I wanted to do this talk? So I speak, some weeks, maybe to a dozen teams or more. And it is true, maybe COVID has accelerated this, but many companies are attempting to make this shift to be more product-led. And there's many different variations of what that means to different companies and different industries. But it's some version of more empowered product teams, or using the product as a source of differentiated growth or sustainable growth, or some version of teams, outcomes, product design, etc. And they're going through the motions, right? They're adopting these structures. They're using techniques like OKRs. They've got small teams. They're going through the motions, but the efforts themselves, for many companies, sort of go through a period where they seem to stall, and there's a level of frustration. And it's really, people feel a little deflated, at least sometimes, that when I'm chatting with them, and they're really looking for answers. The wind is out of the sails, and they're looking for how to reboot their efforts. And there's a couple interesting angles to this, which I think is interesting. So, when I mention that, people say, what's a leadership problem? Well, the fact is, in many of these organizations, senior leadership is using the right words. They have the right intent. They understand, at least intellectually, the concepts here. They understand why it's important. They're actually allocating a fair amount of money to solve these particular problems. And the people on the front lines are very eager for these changes as well. In fact, they're often the people who come and seek me out for help. And middle management is actually struggling to try to make it all work too. So it's easy to point the finger and say, oh, it's a leadership problem, or we just don't have the right people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The business just doesn't get it. They're too change adverse, or our company is too set in our ways, or too complacent. My favorite, we're just content to be a feature factory. But I remember speaking with a CEO recently, and they said, well, you're throwing around, or my team is throwing around, words like feature factory or other things. And you're sort of assuming that I don't care about outcomes here. And my job as CEO is to care about outcomes. I care desperately about outcomes. So I think that it's sort of a mistake. It's easy to point the finger, but in reality, there is a lot of support and teams are making a lot of progress. And it's not a clear root cause that you could point to and single out the problem. In fact, if you follow what a lot of these senior leaders are saying in their investment calls and their calls to the board and et cetera, it's really the talk track of what we talk about a lot in the product community. So hopefully you're not hearing my kid too loud. He's sort of screaming in the back now. But I'll give you some examples. This is an example from banking. Banking's always fun. This bank had adopted small product teams, OKRs across the whole bank. The design team was running design sprints everywhere. There's product owners everywhere. Everything's a product. Literally everything's a product. If you want money, call it a product. Agile everywhere. They'd even actually taken these extra steps, right, to they call them funded teams, which means the shift away from project funding that really values stream-based funding, which is a huge step for a bank. That's not an easy thing to do. But still at the bank, there is a level, this unwillingness to take risks, extra constraints on the teams. And really the transformation was really just at the team level. They'd taken that step for the funding, but really that was the challenge they were having. So this is an example from a bank. Another example recently, massive retailer in the United States that had done all the right things related to COVID and made the shifts to curbside pickup and all sorts of adaptations that they were doing. Again, using all the right words, massive investments in transformation. If you think of percentage of revenue spent on the idea of digital transformation, it was just an incredible sum of money. And they're making progress, but there's a little bit of issues. They'd adopted this kind of one-size-fits-all approach to structures and tools and process. They're going through the motions. There's a sort of lack of nuance about how they were working on this. And at the end of the day, the quote from the senior leader at that company was, "At the end of the day, John, we've really just done a control F on projects, and then we're just replaced with products. We're still treated like an IT service function. There's still the IT business dichotomy at the moment. And we're going to, good things have happened. We survived COVID, all those investments in DevOps, et cetera, had paid off, and we're more effective than ever, but we're shipping way faster than we can learn now at the moment, which is rare." And this isn't just a big company kind of thing. I mean, even recently in the last 2 weeks, was speaking to a late stage startup, lots and lots of funding, hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, massively successful, operating in what I would call like a functional feature factory mode, like pretty usable features, decent adoption from customers. But now things were changing as they were kind of approaching their IPO. They were trying new business models. They couldn't just rely on that initial tailwind around the startup anymore. And really they had to get better. And again, so this is another story of where that feeling of stagnation, like we just can't get over this hump. We're having to adapt to new ways of working, but the inertia of growth behind the company and the lead up to the IPO is there's so much inertia there that it's difficult to adapt. So I've given you 3 stories to give you a sense of what this level of stagnation feels like. And you might relate to some of this in your particular company, or you might have stories about how you worked through it, but we're going to explore this for the remainder of the talk. There's a couple things that come to mind as I reflect on some of the patterns that we'll discuss right now that a lot of these companies are facing. And one I can actually explain with a story. I was observing a company that really in the initial early stages of this transformation that they were undertaking, they hired in a really powerful product leader. There was a lot of top-down change. There was a lot of shuffling of the organization. And And for that company at that time, that was what was necessary to turn the corner. But now, as a couple of years on, and those very same things that had helped the company turn the corner initially were now the thorn in their side. Engineering was, product management is too dictatorial. Design was struggling to get a voice in because of this sort of strong product culture. So I'm mentioning this because in almost every case that I mentioned, there was progress, and now that progress was, in a sense, becoming the Achilles heel of where they were at. They'd sort of exploited what they could on their current trajectory of change, and now they were looking for some kind of catalyst to move forward. All of them had made great strides in what they're doing. The retailer had gone from never involving designers and everything being a massive project to dedicated value stream based teams that were shipping in the course of days and weeks instead of months and quarters. I mean, that is truly incredible for a company to make that kind of shift. Something to be absolutely proud about. But I'm mentioning this because in almost all cases I just mentioned, I was just so impressed by the thoughtfulness of the people involved. There's always a tendency in this case to be like, well, poor leadership and change is hard and they're just dragging their feet. But in almost all cases, there was this genuine attention and desire to figure out how to take a new step in this transformation. So there's 10 patterns that I noticed, and I'm going to go through them and kind of give an example for each one before we jump into this flywheel thing and this exercise that I wanted to jump into. But I think these patterns are worth pointing out. Like all kind of models and patterns, there's caveats and context and stuff that might relate. But I'm going to kind of go through the most common things that I see in companies that have hit this point of stagnation. The first one is they're still grappling with what a real product strategy looks like. And they're going through the motions. They've sort of adopted goal-setting frameworks and all sorts of things. But the real heart of a powerful product strategy that's stable enough to align teams, to to guide aligned autonomy, et cetera, in many of these cases is missing. Example, we're going up market. We're going up into the enterprise. That's not a strategy. That's, like a bit of a positioning thing. What that means for the teams, or what that means for how they'll build product, or what that means for the direction of their product, for example, we're going to have much more complexity in the product, and there's some concerns there, might be more strategic. But for many of these companies, it's still at the most high level, we've got to acquire more customers, or we're going to go up market. And what I say in those cases to those leaders is that if what you're telling me would be the exact same thing that 50 other companies are saying, then I'm not understanding what your unique angle is on this. What is the stubborn take that you're taking? So many of these companies, they're really trying to figure out still what product strategy is. And that should give you some ideas about rooms for improvement if that's in your angle. The second thing, in many cases, the product strategy is great. It's kind of sensible for where they're at, but the organization still is not able to align the structure of the organization around the strategy. So I always ask teams, do you have a strategy? Yes or no? Is the strategy decent? Yes or no? Is it implicit or explicit? Often it's implicit, so we can help make it explicit. But if the structure of the company is still kind of set in this IT background where you've got these component-oriented teams and people aren't really able to work together to achieve that strategy, that's often why these companies are hitting the wall at this point. And structure is very hard to change, which explains why they get all these small teams, they get everything working, but now they're hitting the wall of structure not being aligned with strategy. That's a tough one, and we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. The third thing, especially in banking, regulated industries, healthcare, there's still very low uncertainty tolerance. And I was chatting with a founder, she had once been at a big company before and had a very successful team at that company. that had created just a massive step change for that business. And I was talking to her about her current team at her startup, and she said, I have faith that the team will figure it out because I've seen this work. Aren't you concerned that you don't know the answer? No, I'm not concerned because I'm confident that the team will be able to figure it out. In many of these organizations, there's not a lot of people around, and we'll get to this as one of the patterns, that have seen teams effectively deal with uncertainty to create step change outcomes for the business. So this low uncertainty tolerance causes a fair amount of premature convergence. You have to line up the annual roadmap. You have to line up the plans. There's no ability to iterate. So the teams are kind of stuck in this limbo of still kind of delivering very certain projects. A great example for here is, how long will that take? Well, it could take us 3 months. It could take us 8 months, but it's the most important thing we can work on. No, that's not good enough. Is it going to take 3 months or 8 months? Oh, it's going to take 3 months. Okay, well, let's spec it right now. Okay, well, let's commit to that spec. Okay, there you go. If it's the most important thing you could work on, it doesn't matter whether it takes 8 months or 3 months. It's the most important thing you could work on. But that need for certainty in many environments is what becomes the challenge. The next thing, which is, I think, fascinating, is that in many of the companies that approach this as an agile transformation at first, or something like that, is they read the Scrum book or whatever, and they read Marty Kagan, and they said, we must have small, empowered teams. Okay, great. So suddenly they take 1,000 people and they divide that into tiny 8-person teams. And they say, okay, that's great. We have small empowered teams. Now, the problem is that those teams have tons of dependencies between those teams. They are not 2 pizza teams. They're literally 50 pizza teams because the teams are more like 200-person teams, not like 8-person teams. Now, what that does is that rush to get these small empowered teams in some ways they did that for maybe the right reasons. But the net effect now is that they hire human load balancers to sit in front of every team, work out all the dependencies between the teams. You have massive quagmire roadmaps that are difficult to really, be creative with. And so that dogmatic application of the small team idea, each small team has a PO, every tiny team, without the requisite independence of those teams, now that's what they've hit the wall. That's what's causing this element of stagnation. So other things, I can fly through these patterns, but maybe some of these are helpful and we'll discuss some of these. So some other things that come to mind is the monoprocess problem, where they're a complex business. They were an enterprise or they had thousands of people around, and their application of the product thinking idea was that, well, we've got to have one way of doing product. And in reality, their business is many businesses with many different cultures and many different problem domains and many different shapes of work, etc. And they've attempted to kind of apply a monoprocess, and that kicks back at them. And now, a couple of years later, that's what's kicking back. Other things, they're locked into a quarterly cadence. Oh, we have to do quarterly OKRs. That's what you have to do. To be product-led, you need to do OKRs. And frankly, a quarter only has 61 business days in it. Like, doing amazing work often takes more than a quarter to do things. So again, it's this kind of, well, quarters are convenient. Our enterprise works in terms of quarters. Oh, look, OKRs are supposed to take a quarter. And again, you just get this terrible cascade of goals. And now they're struggling with this as they go on. The last couple patterns I can just breeze through so I don't take too much time on those. But I kind of alluded to this before, but one of the real issues is this idea that no one in the company has ever seen it work, except for a handful of product developers or new hires or other people who've come from other environments. So, I always ask, well, has your CEO ever sat in a usability testing session? Oh God, no. No, they've never done that. Or has anyone from your team seen a team make $10 million in 2 days? No, that never happened. Like, that's crazy. Could that ever happen? Or has anyone from your team seen a release fail spectacularly. Well, we think kind of maybe we saw that happen, maybe. So what you get is you get this, for some of these more advanced approaches, as you think about the product transformation stuff, it just requires a leap of faith. And there's not enough people, the critical mass, like I mentioned, that founder who had such a great success at a prior company that they just have faith for their team. The faith levels are a little bit low at the moment. And the final one, other than just sort of an old delivery mindset, et cetera, I'm just going to joke with the one at the end. In a lot of these cases, they brought in like an MBA consultant class into the company to modernize. And a lot of these people are very savvy from a business perspective, and they're actually pretty technically savvy, but many of them have never actually been on a team and worked on a product development team. And so there's a little bit of that, this pattern I've noticed, and not like this is the most common pattern, but in a lot of times the stagnation is caused by a level of, again, it's just, there's people making really important decisions for the company, either consultants or new leaders they've brought in who've never really done it. They understand the theory and they've read Marty Kagan and they've read the books, but they've never done it themselves. So it's very difficult for them to conceptualize what's happening. So that gives you the 10 patterns. I'll go over them briefly. No real product strategy, mismatch between strategy and structure, low uncertainty tolerance, dogmatic application of small teams, monoprocess, overburdening quarterly cadences. No one's really done it before except a small group of people. Or the other one, I have some, and then this consultant class, and then in some cases limited measurement. So those are the patterns. And what I want to do now for the rest of the talk is kind of talk you through, well, so what are we going to do about that? Because, barring any major toxicity in the company or just terrible leadership, and I mentioned that in most cases that's not the case, the next step, the reboot, is really about persuading people to get a little bit out of their comfort zone and to re-engage what I would call like a flywheel to get to that next step. And it's important to acknowledge that too, like the stagnation is itself a byproduct of progress. It's just you've exploited the easy things that you could do. So what I'm going to do right now is, people may wonder kind of what do I do day to day at Amplitude? I help companies, but I've sort of been thinking about this flywheel concept, and I'm going to show you what I use each day. And because I think it holds the answer to this question is, where should you focus to kickstart this effort? And what I'll do, actually, let's try this because this will be fun. And if people are connected to the chat, they will be in a position where they can see it. So what I'll do is I'll rely on the organizers. So I'm going to paste into StreamYard the link to this mural board. And if you're getting bored of seeing me talk and you don't want to see me share my screen, I'll be drawing and stuff, but you can follow along on the board yourself if that's better. So I'm going to share my screen now and jump to this whiteboard. And hopefully you're having fun. Let's try it. All right, let's see if this works. We've got a screen. We're going to share it. We've got this thing. And so hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to assume that you can, and we'll just keep going. I see people joining, so I think something must be happening. So I can bring you to me. I can bring everyone to me, and that might help as we do this. So my thought on this is that this stagnation, again, and there's nothing clearly wrong. Everyone means well. There's a lot of momentum that's kind of petered out and what the problem is. So I'm going to sort of give you a visual tour here of this flywheel and then some potential areas to be able to fix it. So one way you can view, I think, product and product development is a set of activities and capabilities that you link together to create outcomes. And my theory is this. My theory is that in these organizations that have stagnated at this point, the only way out consistently way to that next level is to create the environment where you can get a flywheel going, where better outcomes are possible, and that the organization can learn what's possible, this kind of show not tell sort of thing. So I'll walk you through this particular flywheel so you can see. And this touches on some of the patterns that I was just mentioning. So first, we have to have some kind of product strategy and a vision, and we need to deploy that to the team. So that's a skill. And without that, it's very hard to move forward. Without that shared language, it's very, very difficult. Now, I mentioned this problem of premature convergence and the idea that this uncertainty tolerance actually can become rather difficult. And so ideally, our teams converge at the optimal time, not too early, but not too early such that they solution everything, but at just the right point, they converge. And then you've got some things. Well, what do we have to do? Well, we have to make good quality decisions reasonably quickly. We can make fast decisions that are crappy. That won't help us. And we can make perfect decisions very, very, very slowly, and that probably won't help us. So you need a balance of speed and quality of decision making. And then there's speed and quality of action. And ideally, you have qualitative and quantitative data that helps, improve the decision making and improve the strategy. And in theory, you're able to experiment at the same time, which also helps you. But if you do those things, you're able to generate, some impact at what you're doing. Now, importantly, in a lot of these organizations, is the impact is there, but no one knows it exists. There's no way to really link the work to the impact, the short or long-term impact it's creating. So this is very important. Once you've created impact, you need to be able to link it to these things. Now, this is where this virtuous loop happens. And I think where, this gives you some ideas about where to focus. Because what we're really talking about here is once you're able to get that visibility of impact, it kicks off this virtuous loop of trust levels increase, pride and connection in the work increases, your confidence increases, your morale and motivation increases, employee retention increases, you invest more in tooling, support, resources, etc. Your risk tolerance goes up because you've seen something work. Teams start to share what works between them. And the critical thing, I mentioned the org stagnating on these things, is that they've hit this point where they need to take that leap. And without the visibility of impact and without those outcomes that people can point to, it's very difficult to kick this off. But once you do kick off these particular things, it sends us down and creates this virtuous cycle where it supports the strategy. We're able to orient around the customer more. In fact, those types of things improve psychological safety. If you have better risk tolerance, you're more open to disconfirming information, and it also cascades down all the way into continuous learning. And in fact, it generates more data that you can then use to improve your data literacy. These things. So I've shared this particular, Miro board with you for a reason, because what I've discovered is that the next step is really zeroing in on, forget about the way, forget about are you using OKRs or whether the teams are small or et cetera. Those are solutions in a sense. But the important step is to really try to think to yourself, what is blocking us right now? Is it, and I list some of these things over here, is it our ability to converge in an optimal time? And I've listed a lot of things that can help you do that. You need dedicated teams. You can plan at the right resolutions of work. You can limit work in progress. There's many different things you can do to converge at the optimal time. Are our teams data literate? Can they produce quality insights? That's where my company comes in, which is helpful. Do we have coverage for the data, both qualitative and quantitative? And this speed and quality of action one is interesting because in some of these organizations, they're just still shipping so slowly the technical practices are not in line, that no matter how well-meaning the teams are with their product practices, things just still move so slowly that it's hard to get this flywheel going. So do you have the team structure in place? Are you limiting work in progress? Do you invite diverse perspectives into your teams? And we can go through all of these and you kind of get the idea. And again, you have access to this board and we can share this particular link. But one thing I've noticed, for example, I mentioned these companies and many of these that are stalling, it kind of varies for them. Some of them have such big batch planning that they can't converge at the optimal time. Some of them don't really have the tooling and the staffing, et cetera, to be able to actually have insights about what they're working. Some of them are very slow to act. So that's the problem up there. Some of them take forever for decision making. There's no psychological safety. The decision-making process is extremely top-down, so that's where they're slow. So you get the idea here. What I've been encouraging teams to do is to, when you've hit this point of stagnation, is to step back and think about what the issue is. I mentioned that one of the top patterns is this strategy and vision deployment. And I think that the issue there is, there's obviously you can learn a lot about product strategy. But what I say to product leaders is if you don't have a coherent product strategy, the business will make one up for you. And so this is where there's a lot of leverage. I wrote this book called North Star Playbook. You can Google that, and that gives you some way to start. There's other models that you can help here. But without that product strategy and vision deployment, there's really a lot of issues. The one thing about psychological safety, I would say, is, again, many of these companies are not bad places to work. People are very eager. They're actually pretty nice places to work. People are generally very nice to each other. So it's not like psychological safety is the burning problem in a lot of these cases. Otherwise, they probably would have never even gotten to this point of stagnating, right? Because they would just still be stuck in those things. But it's something to consider. And the final ones are kind of a little less of the culprits in many cases. They're kind of self-explanatory. The link work to impact, again, I mentioned that, and this is something we see at Amplitude a lot, is that people imagine that they need fancy like data science models, et cetera. And then I ask the team, are you just counting things? Are you even doing a decision review to reflect on the projects that you've worked on? The reason why I mention that is because if you're trying to reset that leader expectation, if you're trying to get them to see that sometimes there's step changes and then sometimes your best ideas don't work out, if you have no way and no structure and no way to reflect on the work, even if it's just basic counts in an analytics product, it's going to be difficult to kick off that loop where leaders begin to say, wow, I'm really amazed at what can happen when a product team really knocks it out to the top. And the last one is customer orientation, which is fairly familiar to those of us on the call. But at the end of the day, a lot of the stagnation I notice in these environments is just talking to a customer is too difficult. They've created these highly empowered teams. And then you say, are they empowered to pick up the phone and talk to a customer? Oh, no, we can't do that. So they're not really empowered. So this is another element. So I've shared the link, but I think that the big picture here related to these when you've stagnated and hit these points is now is the point where you need to dig in and think about, in theory of constraints, the idea is there's a small number of constraints that are sort of holding up the system. And for me to sit here and say, you must have X is probably not the right thing. You need to take the step to think about it on this type of level. And I think the way out of this stagnation, at least what I see with some of our customers and people are successful, is the visibility of team impact, driving into increased trust levels and confidence levels, the power of a compelling product strategy that gets reinforced by those things, and then this ability to link work to impact. If you can focus in those areas, I think that's really what it will take to kind of allow that step change to work. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and hopefully this was interesting, at least to just see the thinking of someone. I can share a PDF of this later. I've actually used this for assessment. So I will sit with a customer and say, okay, where are we at with converging at the optimal time? Do you have dedicated team, or like, are people even available to converge? They might say no. At which point, what I'm doing is, I will go and develop one of these with them and just say, well, it sounds like at the moment the dedicated teams thing might be a little bit more in red. Are you limiting work in progress? They might say, well, yeah, we're actually very decent at that. Can anyone shift their calendar for anything? Oh, no, our calendars are completely blocked. So I go and use this type of thing as almost as an assessment to figure out really which one of these things is at the moment holding them back to do it. So hopefully this was interesting, kind of a look into the life of someone doing what I'm doing. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that come up from folks.
Cue me popping up. Thank you so much for your insights. I don't think I could type so many insights. Although I'm kind of stuck on premature convergence if I was to be a little bit naughty at the moment. But I had so many other insights. And thank you so much for that. So we're definitely going to move on to Q&A. Everyone can drop their questions in, but because we've only got a short amount of time, we also asked some of our senior community members to jump up and ask some questions kind of on behalf of the community as well. And let's just keep this conversation going because the Miro board is a fantastic resource. Thank you so much for sharing that. There was just so many insights.
Too, as I work more with teams, so you can check back even on it, which is
absolutely. So I'm going to bring up Ash from Outfit.
Thanks, Louise. I was the same. I don't think I could type fast enough, and I've got like a whole page of notes now. And I actually, we were asked to sort of think about our questions beforehand, but in true, adaptation style, I've changed mine. John, my question is, you talked about linking the work to impact.
Yeah.
What happens if you can't do that? Because inevitably there will be things that you can't quite find, the right impact or some type of impact. You talked about it being a flywheel. Is that hugely disruptive? How do you?
I think it is because, let's just step back, and it could be qualitative, it could be quantitative. The pattern that I've noticed is that the senior leaders, especially if they haven't done it before, or they were in a highly successful feature factory that made boatloads of money for 3 decades, and this is their new gig, right? I think that's why it's disruptive if you can't link that. But what I would say is you need to think, are you measuring to learn, or are you measuring to manage and judge and trust? And if you're measuring to learn, you're looking to just reduce uncertainty at an acceptable amount to make better decisions tomorrow that you couldn't make today. And so what tends to happen is that people, I think, set a bar that's way too high, especially in a lot of uncertainty. So, I would recommend everyone gets the book, How to Measure Anything, Intangibles in Business. It's a really, really good book. But the idea there is we've got to reduce uncertainty. What's the minimally viable measurement necessary to reduce uncertainty to be smarter we were? So I would challenge teams that what's the problem is that once the data scientist gets involved and when someone from finance gets involved, and they're like, well, I need to do an ROI calculation. And you're like, well, could we just start with the premise, did this have a greater than 0% impact? We've taken money out of the bank to build this thing, so we're already in the red, right? Did this do anything? And that's what I meant about the counting things. If all the team does is you know what, I think if we're successful with this, we might observe a couple things happening, and then observe to see whether they happen. People think that you suddenly snap your fingers and do multivariate A/B experiments and all the questions are answered like Netflix. But often in an environment, it's just observing what happens to the counts that you care about connected with the issue. So you got to build that muscle. You've got to instrument your product. I mean, there's products like Amplitude and other products that make this incredibly easy for teams to do, right? And so you've got to cover that. You just got to get that muscle going. I can't see a way around it. And I think that the constant I'm not sure about the impact, sends this reverberation through the organization that we just don't know, which is like where you don't want to be, right? Like that's when those MBA people will like subvert what you're doing in a big way.
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to jump in at this point. Now, actually, I just want to bring everyone else up because we've gathered kind of a panel of our product leaders here in Brisbane. So you've met Ash from Outfit. We've got Greg from leads the team over at Jumbo. Carolyn, that you would have met in our last event from Citrus Ad, and Jack's a ring-in from ClipChamp, but is their resident Amplitude guru. So I think we absolutely nailed it on our selection of the ClipChamp team. So, Greg, you're next up. Have you got a question for John?
I found myself nodding through a lot of that flywheel because we've gone through various different things, and Amplitude actually helped a lot with the data literacy and data usability and helping them give the team more autonomy and whatnot. One of the things where I guess we're struggling at the moment is in all of our expansion strategy, the bets that are a little bit longer. So the loop's going a little bit slower.
Yeah.
And I think it might be in the convergence at optimal time. That's I think we're probably placing we don't know what we should be focusing on expansion, so we're trying to do a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if maybe you could dive deeper into that. And I didn't quite get also the limiting work in progress versus planning in progress. I think it's something there, but I thought maybe if you explained it in more detail,
Yeah, I mean, the limiting work in progress and planning in progress is just, if you're playing Project Tetris and trying to keep everyone insanely busy all the time, teams will never have time to iterate. They'll never have opportunities to chase new things. If you're, I always say, start finishing, stop starting. And organizations that are optimized for starting are optimized for the optics of starting. It's actually way more incentivized to say you're starting something because people don't really worry about if it's finishing, right? And so I think that's how you noticed high whip showed up in a bunch of places, because basically you can't get people into a meeting when everyone is super slammed with work. Well, let's just send the designer upstream 4 months ahead of time to try to figure it out, and then they'll just drop it and throw it over the fence to the team. And in other cases, do you want to iterate on that? Oh, goodness. I mean, we've just got so much work. Well, we'll just watch that one. We'll just wait 4 months and put it. So that's where the whip thing comes. It's like in our personal life. If you leave no room for flexibility, you're always chasing your tail. That's what I do pretty much all the time. So I'm a hypocrite. But so I think that relates to that. The longer time frame bets, again, first is naming it. And I think that this is what I meant by the mono process thing, where you try to treat everything the same way, and then cracks begin to form. And so I think even just saying, look, we make a portfolio of bets. Some are like pretty basic bets that we expect to put $1 in and get $1.30 out. They're not like the biggest step changes. There's these other things which are going to be we're looking at real leading indicators. They're much more exploratory. We've got to really pay attention to what the signals are telling us. We've got to protect those teams, make sure everyone can be in the room. The risks are that we might put a year or two into this and it's just going to flop and it's going to do that. And I think the first thing is just labeling it as a type of bet, making a taxonomy of work to realize that that's different from the other work. And the second part about it, I think, is again, just focusing the team on the signals that are going to help them lower risk and lower uncertainty where it matters. And so a lot of times I think people sort of throw their hands up with these efforts and be like, oh, it's just so strategic. We're just not going to worry about it at all. And they don't create a learning backlog. I always say teams should make a learning backlog. Like, what's the backlog of learning areas? What's most important? What experiments are you going to learn? And if you put that structure in place, it can help with the longer burn efforts. The worst thing to do is to just shrug and just be like, big bets, like high rolling plays, because then the makers and stuff hate that. They think it's like very not cool to do it. So hopefully that answers the question around the high whip stuff, which shows up in a bunch of places too.
Cool. And I'll just let everyone know that, yes, of course, we plan to finish on the end of the hour, but let's be honest, it's World Product Day, so we're going to run a little bit over. So just slack your next meeting now, because this content's too good to pass up. And talking of great content, I'll ask Carolyn to ask a question.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to a lot of what's going on there. Product strategy and vision is probably one of the biggest ones that I relate to, as well as that limiting the work in progress is constant struggle. So I'm asking about the product strategy and vision. I really relate to that whole, if you don't set one, people will make it up for you. So I'm keen to understand how you can sort of start shifting that age-old, ingrained, lagging indicator thinking that is just built into a lot of the C-suites traditionally, and get them more on that leading indicator of success. So, you know, peeling away that just we need to be number one, or we need to increase revenue or customer numbers. Yeah.
One of the things, so first of all, what's fascinating to me is when you corner the people from finance or the other people in the business and you say, can we both accept that this is a little bit of a layer cake situation? There's many things we could do to burn through the numbers in the short term that will kill the business. Would you agree? And typically they're like, yeah, okay, we need to survive. I'll get, you know, first we need to survive. But yes, I agree with you. I was in a business like that and it failed spectacularly because we did that. It's like, okay, all right. So we've at least have common understanding that there's ways to chase short-term, you know, vanity type things that will set us up in the wrong way. And then I think that the second thing is just, once you can get them to kind of acknowledge that, is you have to bring the story. I mean, I've used this North Star framework thing. There's other frameworks to do this. There's other ways to talk about your beliefs about how things are connected. But you need to bridge the divide between the quote unquote work and these mid to long-term business outcomes and provide like the coherent narrative. And this sounds complex, but, you know, I always use the JIRA ticket test. Like if I went to a developer and I said, go from this 1 to 3 hour task to a 1 to 3 decade bet of the company or 1 to 3 year bet for the company in 4 more steps. Could you do it? And then they'll be like, yeah, I'm, you know, adjusting the position of this drop down because I think it will help this workflow go a little bit faster because I think that we need to like set up our enterprise customers to be more efficient. But, you know, and they'll stop. Like they can't, they've already kind of topped out of that coherent narrative to do it. So one thing I would say, Carolyn, is that, I mean, it takes a lot of work, but you have to map the leading and lagging indicators. You have to be able to present I don't care what model you use, you have to present a coherent mental model for how you think that these pieces are going to contribute to sustainable mid to long-term growth. And you almost have to be like a broken record with the sustainable, differentiated mid to long-term growth for the company that we're going to do that. So I don't know if that helps. We should do another talk around that too. But I think it's that I think people, they when they think strategy, they Google strategic framework, they get a strategic framework, they fill it in. It's a big cascade of ideas. They fill out the canvas and they think they're done and they do that. They never show it to someone. But strategy really is like a tapestry of beliefs. You know, it really is beliefs about the environment, the context, the landscape we're working in, about how we can impact it, what the world's going to do. You know, it's much richer than any kind of template can get you. So the first step is to get the right group of people together and allow you to have a conversation about it. Big topic. I feel I didn't do your question justice, but I think that's what I'm thinking for that.
Fantastic. And we're going to throw to our fourth question asker. Jack, thanks for joining us, and I appreciate you've got some fairly hands-on experience with Amplitude as well. Go for it. Ask a question.
Cheers. Thank you so much. We are big Amplitude fans here at ClipChamp, so I really appreciate the presentation, John. We've been hearing so much about these teams that are struggling, some more than others, to sort of go on this journey and try to bring in these best practice things. But where does this best practice come from these days? Who are the teams or the players that you think are really pushing forward or innovating in terms of how teams build products? And what areas do you think in terms of teams building products are going to be changing or innovating most in the next couple of years?
Well, the one thing that I've been saying too is that I think this is kind of what I meant with the flywheel thing. Like progress is so contextual. I'd say there's more harm by trying to copy and paste whatever you read that Intercom is doing. You know, and I talk to all these companies, and then you go and talk to Intercom, and they're like, we're really jealous about who whatever is doing, you know, and then you go and talk to that team, and they're like, we're really jealous what the other person is doing. But I think that the first thing is that, like, you know, if you are a bank operating like it's 2008, you're competing against the banks that are operating like it's 2005 and 2012. And there's a really nice phrase of like gap thinking versus present thinking. And gap thinking is the classic consultant way to think about it. We are here. In 5 years, we need to be here. Exactly what must we do to be able to close the gap? What are the best practices? Like, what are people doing? How are we going to change that? And present thinking is more like, what's an idealized version of today? And how can we get through that loop a little better? So I kind of want to punt on the question a little bit, because I think that people just focus too much on the ways and not the why of what you're doing. Like, hey, are we able to make decisions a little better? Because are we able to make decisions a little better than we could a month ago? Are we moving that particular thing on? And to just look at startups, I mean, this happens a lot. So banks will try to copy exactly how startups are structured for everything they're doing, except not really solve the underlying structure problem, right? And then the banks and the big organizations that are doing a lot better are thinking like, well, okay, this is like a network of different teams. Like, we've got to create the autonomy. We've got to create those things that are doing it. So if you copy it, you know, you could be in bad shape. So I don't know. I don't have a great, I mean, I feel I'm lucky at Amplitude at Amplitude, we have 3 types of companies, and this is a vast simplification. But the reason why I'm saying this is that there's great companies in each of these categories. One are like rapid scale up startups. Their problem is chaos. They are just on a rocket ship, and they're just trying to figure out how to tame the chaos of their data and their decisions or whatever. There's people who are doing a better job at it and a worse job. The second category are tech companies that were really successful, but now have to like reinvent themselves a little bit. And so their problem is hubris. They were so good at something, and then people are telling them, well, now you're going to adopt a loyalty or subscription-based model. And they're like, we've never done that before. That's really difficult. And then the third category would be this sort of digital, you know, they really must transform the digital transformer. Transformer is a really good show, but like the digital transformers who, it's funny, they're often better off than the second category, because the second category has hubris. The third category, they know they have to transform how they're working or they're going to go out of business. Their problem is inertia. It's a massive organization, and there's tons of inertia to do that. So I think depending on which one of those companies are, you could say, well, who are role models in that particular company? You could think like a Microsoft has sort of had to reinvent itself, and it's taking these couple of years to be able to do that. That's an example of the second type of company, where there's a lot of hubris at Microsoft until Satya Nadella was there to do that, and he's chipping away. The startups, you could look at a rapid scale up startup and think like, oh my God, what Airbnb did to try to survive COVID, and now has come out with like shipping 100 features in one video in one quarter. It's like blows your mind. And the digital disruptors could be like an Amplitude customer's Anheuser-Busch. It's literally like a beverage distributor who's rethinking how they're doing distribution. So find role models in your category and look at how they're working and network with them and become friends with those product leaders, I think is the best advice I can give there.
Fantastic. And I will just insert one question, because we've had, sounds like things are going on in the background, the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the links that we shared with you were the signs of the 12 signs you're working in a feature factory, and you've had a couple of iterations of that article. Can you share some of the things So the latest iteration, I think, is from last year.
12 things I've learned about 12 signs in the feature factory. That one?
Yes. Is there anything that's kind of come out from today that stands out as something that might be in the next iteration of the 12 signs you're working
probably just more context, like the idea that you can have this sort of a functional feature factory that is delivering reasonably usable things could be the biggest improvement for that particular organization that you're doing. So I've just become a little bit more nuanced in those things. The other thing too is that like I kind of over-indexed on the dysfunctions there and less about this idea that like a little bit of just stagnation. It's like people really mean well in most of these environments, and it's not so, it's not an evil PM who's decided not to reflect on how they work. It's just someone has decided that they're going to put 50 meetings on their calendar every week or something. So I think just being more nuanced would probably be my approach.
Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to put the guys on the spot at the moment because we've covered so much content, and John, I'm going to bring you into this as well.
Yeah.
If you could just offer one takeaway from today, what would it be? John, have you got something that you just want everyone to kind of take away, whether it's a link, resource to read, or just one of the messages that we've covered today?
Well, I think I'll share the link with that flywheel thing that I'm talking about. But I think that's generally, I think the idea of present thinking versus gap thinking, which was a theme of what I was talking about, which is this sort of idealized future model versus what you can do right now to get that flywheel going and doing is an important thing to consider as you do it.
Perfect. Ash, you've got your one takeaway or one you want to share?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously the one that I sort of asked John about before with how do you tie impact. So I kind of get that there's always impact in some way, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. So that, and also I liked the making good decisions quickly. That was a real standout for me as well.
Great. Greg?
I mean, I resonated a lot with it, and we've gone through various different stages, so that was interesting. I think I guess the main takeaway for me is more the better vocabulary to kind of explain some of the things that we're experiencing. So I'd like to kind of link back to that Miro a few times and kind of be like, oh, this is where it is, and then kind of going off to that chart and just having that vocabulary to then, I guess, better explain that to others, I think will help.
Yeah, that's one thing about that too, is the idea of, I mean, the next iteration of that, I'm going to explain in non-product terms what each one of those feels like. So everyone knows, like, your in-laws are coming out of town. Should you plan every day for your in-laws while they're in town? It seems like a good idea on the surface. 2 days in, they're tired and they want to do their own thing. That's an example of premature convergence. Like, you should decide on what your in-laws should do at the last responsible moment. So I'm going to add like kind of real world examples for each of the things. So that could help as well.
Perfect. Carolyn, your big takeaway?
Oh, it's just that, I'm not alone. All of these things, I'm experiencing little bits of every little piece of them, and so it's knowing how to tackle each of those and what order, I guess, to make sure that we address things in the right order. Yeah, so it's all of it's very relatable.
Jack, can you narrow down a takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's all great. One that stuck with me is to stop starting and start finishing. I think I got that right. Yeah, I think definitely relevant to teams I've worked on before.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for being a part today. John, in particular, those insights in the Miro board are going to be a discussion of our roadshow for the rest of the year, I suspect, and a regular reference. And thankfully, we've recorded this, so we'll be sharing this with the rest of our...
I was talking fast, as I did it, so it's...
That's okay. Thank you, everyone, for making the time to be here. And remember that our next event's coming up in June, so we'll be opening registrations. Yes, we will share all the links from today. I know I'm going to get that question straight away. I'm going to send you an email with all the links. You can surround yourself in all this amazing content from today. Special thanks to the guys coming into us from the LTP conference down south as well, who made the time to jump in on their lunchtime. Any questions? This is the community share. So follow our LinkedIn, send us some questions and suggestions for our next ProductTank via LinkedIn, and make sure to register. And thank you again. Happy World Product Day. And thank you, little mini Cutler, for providing us so much fantastic entertainment to end on. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right. Bye.
See ya.